What does Donald Trump have in common with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez? What does Boris Johnson have in common with George Washington? What does Confucius have in common with Warren Buffett? Well, in this episode of the Changing Minds podcast, we're going to dive into the world of rhetoric. We're going to look at how techniques from ancient Greece still inform the way we can become much more powerful speakers. In this particular episode, we're going to look at how we position ourselves in the mind of other people through the way in which we use language. We'll be exploring techniques from Ethos to Phronesis, from Arete to Eunoia, all different ways to be able to position ourselves in the mind of other people in a powerful way. I'll give you lots of examples, and by the end of this, you'll know how to be even more effective at crafting your language such that you're able to position yourself as persuasively as possible. This one is going to be a game changer. Welcome to another episode of the Changing Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and in this particular episode, we're going to start a series where we're going to begin to look at rhetoric. Now, rhetoric is something that's been around for thousands of years. Back many, many years ago, in terms of ancient Greece, there's what we call the sophists. And the sophists really studied how we're able to use language to be able to persuade other people. And they famously described the importance of using rhetoric to be able to make it so that you could basically argue almost any point. A lot of these sophists would roam around and make arguments that seemed impossible to make, but they really found a way to be able to be really persuasive. And this is where a lot of our understanding, especially from a political speech perspective or a motivational speaking point of view, we learned a lot from this ancient skill, this ancient technique of rhetoric. Now, rhetoric itself is made up of a lot of different elements, and what we're going to be doing is each episode that we cover rhetoric, we're going to be exploring exactly how different elements work. We're going to be looking at how you can position yourself as more persuasive, how you can use the musicality of language in a more powerful way, how to be able to create the right kinds of comparisons and descriptions, how to impact the way in which people feel, how to make a very sort of airtight argument. We're going to be exploring the power of rhetoric to be able to be a more persuasive speaker, a more persuasive communicator, so that regardless of the context you find yourself in, you'll find a lot of really useful ways to be able to be even better at changing minds. So in this particular episode, we're going to start off by looking at the positioning of you in the mind of the listener. So we're going to be looking at how do you position yourself such that they perceive you as credible, so they perceive you as believable, so they perceive you as persuasive. What are some of the things that you can use in language to be able to help you to do just that? In future episodes as well, we're going to tackle the US presidential campaigns of both Kamala Harris as well as Donald Trump, and we're going to look specifically at both of their speeches at the national conventions, the Democrat convention and the Republican convention, and we're going to analyze and identify some of the rhetorical techniques used in both speeches. So we're going to be looking at rhetoric in a very real way on that episode. But today we're going to be exploring mainly 6 different aspects or elements of how we position ourselves persuasively. And we're going to start with ethos. Now, ethos is something that was popularized by Aristotle in his book Rhetoric more than 2,000 years ago. Aristotle described 3 different elements to persuasion or rhetoric, and he talked about logos, pathos, and ethos. And logos is making an appeal to logic or reason. Pathos is making an appeal to emotion, so changing a person's mind by changing the way they feel. And then ethos is changing a person's mind by positioning yourself as credible. So it's almost like, because it's coming from me, you should believe it. And ethos is one of the most powerful ways, especially today, to be able to influence and persuade people. So what I want to do is give you a bunch of examples so that you can see how we position ourselves in language using ethos. So the first example comes from Joe Biden, actually, the president of the United States of America from 2020 to 2024, more or less. But Joe Biden said, "I've dealt with world leaders for many years and have tackled economic crises and foreign policy challenges before, and I'm ready to do it again." He also said, "I took office at a time of economic upheaval, and we passed measures to ensure a swift recovery." So he's positioning and reminding the American people that he has actually been working on a lot of crises in public service over the course of his career. Another example comes from Boris Johnson. "As mayor, we managed to deliver thousands of affordable homes, get crime down, and keep London's transport system moving." So whatever else he says about the messages, the bottom line is he's going and talking about being a mayor of London, and that's what gives him the ethos for people to listen to him. So again, Biden's leaning on the fact that he's dealt his whole career with crises. Boris Johnson's talking about the fact that he has been mayor of a city, so he understands things. Brené Brown, if we move from politics into sort of thought leadership or psychology, Brené Brown, in her wonderful TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability in 2010, she said, I'm a research professor at the University of Houston. I study vulnerability, courage, and empathy, and my PhD is social work. In this particular clip, she really shows that she's drawing upon her credentials to position herself with that level of ethos. So it's like, you can believe me when I'm talking about this stuff. I know what I'm talking about. And it's just a couple of lines that positions her really, really well. Another example would be Gary Vaynerchuk, or Gary V. He had a keynote a few years ago, and he talked about, over the next few years, I grew my father's business from a $3 million company to a $60 million enterprise. So again, he's appealing to ethos to go, listen, I've gone from 3 million to 60 million. I know what I'm talking about. Again, appealing to ethos in that way. And again, in all of these cases, it's not that they just tell you. Most of them are making a point, but in making that point, they also appeal to ethos. They try to position themselves and establish themselves as credible and persuasive as a result. So once again, for us, what we can do is we can ask ourselves, what is it that we can do in a sentence that makes it so that we're positioning ourselves in the most persuasive way? How can we enlighten people as to why they should believe us? And how can we do that in a subtle way? And once again, this is mainly solidly about credibility and positioning ourselves in that way. As you can see, using experience and sometimes expertise or track record, as Gary Vaynerchuk would have given, to be able to position ourselves in that manner. And again, the key is for us to think through how we do this. Now, at the end of this episode, I'll walk you through some of the ways to be able to prevent us from coming across a little bit too name droppy or a little bit too arrogant in the way we do things. But it's important for us to get practiced at doing this, and some of the examples we've just gone over should certainly help with that. The next particular area that we'll go into, or the next particular element rather, of being able to position ourselves as persuasive is known as Arete. And Arete is demonstrating moral virtue or excellence. Now, this is an interesting one because a couple of episodes back, I talked about signaling, and I talked about the fact that we're all signaling to the world, trying to position ourselves in different ways. And one of the biggest things that happens online especially is that people virtue signal. This is signaling to other people, look how virtuous I am. And part of that sometimes is the cancel culture, right? So part of it is sometimes, oh, I can't believe you did that. That's the worst thing ever. Oh, you're the worst. Oh my goodness. And we go on with our, keyboard warrior hands, and we start to attack people because they're not doing what we think they should do. And they're not living life the way we think they should live life. It's an example, I suppose, of using Arete. However, it's not necessarily the kind of example that I want to share with you. There's a few ways to put it. We could be saying, this is what I stand for. This is what I believe in. This is what I stand against. This is how I act. This is how you should act. And those are some of the kind of subtextual messages that we communicate when we use Arete. So let me give you a few examples here. Martin Luther King would have said something along the lines of, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And in that beautiful line, one of the things he's sort of positioning himself as is someone who's very much about justice and how important that is. So in other words, every time we make a moral statement about something being good and something being bad, we are to a degree using a form of Arete. Volunteering has always been important to me. Could be something that you might say to somebody if you're, on a date with somebody, or you're trying to get them to see you as a generous person or a kind person. That's always a good one as well. In terms of business, a good example would be, I believe that maintaining transparency in all our operations is essential for the trust that we've built. So once again, you're telling people what you think is important, but the subtext there is, well, I think this is important, but also because I think this is important, this positions me as that kind of person. So I'm this type of person because I think this particular thing is important. And so every single time we make a statement about what's good or what's bad, what we think matters and what we think doesn't, all of those are examples. Another one would be, when you hear people say, I've dedicated my career to, fighting this. I've dedicated my career to ensuring that. I've dedicated my career. Every time we talk about what we do, we are positioning our actions as being, this is the kind of person I am. So that's an example of Arete. I'll give you one more. We prioritize our employees' well-being, ensuring a safe and supportive work environment. So we've heard that a million times, but again, that's the effort of the person, the employer or whatnot, to be able to try to go, this is what we stand for. These are our values. And anytime you communicate your values or what you believe in, or again, how you act or what you stand for, you are using Arete. So the thing for us to think about and walk away with is to go, what are the qualities, the moral type qualities, the virtues, let's say, that I want my audience to position me as having? What are those particular qualities? And then what we do is we figure out a way to be able to make it so that we're communicating those qualities through the things we say we do, the things that we say we stand for, the things we say we believe in. So it's being clever like that. Certainly, that is a much better way to be able to demonstrate Arete. Number 3 is Phronesis. And Phronesis is showing practical wisdom and sound judgment. So this is really demonstrating that you're a good decision maker, that you're smart, and that you're wise. So it's like positioning yourself as wise with good judgment. Some examples from more famous people would be Confucius said, "It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop." I mean, that's a simple quote, but it is positioning Confucius, as many of Confucius's sayings do, as being very wise. Because again, they're a lot of times profound, impactful, but they're giving a message that is hopefully helping people to be able to be better and do better as a result. Warren Buffett says, in terms of his secrets to be able to be a better investor, very simple. Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1, right? Very sort of obvious there. But at the same time, once again, he's using Phronesis because what he's doing is by giving that like one-liner, that powerful sort of idea, he's demonstrating a sort of practical wisdom. Every single self-help guru, every thought leader to a degree is constantly demonstrating Phronesis. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a not so good way. Sun Tzu also said the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Very interesting and again, catchy and also sort of counterintuitive because you immediately think war and fighting. But instantly what he's doing is he's leveraging this Phronesis. And again, none of these particular figures probably even heard of or know the term Phronesis. That's not what it's about. These are just labels given, more academic labels, I suppose, to the specific techniques used. But fundamentally, when you make a statement that is insightful or wise, you're positioning yourself as wise as a result of that. And then Socrates, the only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. Once again, it is wise because we all intuitively know it's true, but yet it feels counterintuitive at the same time. It's one of those interesting quotes that makes us just go, huh. And anytime we make somebody go, huh, immediately we are positioning ourselves as wise because we're thinking about something in a different way that they've ever heard before. So Phronesis is really about making it so that you're demonstrating wisdom in the one-liner or the couple of lines that you're communicating. The next one is Eunoia, and Eunoia is displaying goodwill toward the audience. So we've already talked so far about credibility in terms of ethos. We've also talked about virtue signaling or our ability to be able to demonstrate virtue. We've talked about the importance of making sure that we're showing practical wisdom and demonstrating intelligence, for instance. The next one is showing that we genuinely care about people and the goodwill towards our audience. This notion of eunoia is also something else that we often want to be able to communicate. An example from a couple of American politicians, we got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez frequently emphasizes her commitment to working classes. For example, she says things like, "I wasn't born to a wealthy or powerful family. Mother from Puerto Rico, dad from the South Bronx. I was born in a place where your zip code determines your destiny. I'm an educator, an organizer, a working class New Yorker. I've worked with expectant mothers. I've waited tables and led classrooms." And immediately she's trying to position to, these are the people I care about. These are the people that are important to me. Donald Trump, since we may as well bring good old Donald Trump into the mix, he has said, "I will be your voice. I will fight for you," and talks about, appealing to the forgotten men and women across the board. Whenever he talked before about draining the swamp in Washington, D.C. when he initially got elected in 2016. He's again framed as cleaning up the corruption. And again, the subtext of all of this is, I care about you. I care about the common men and women that I'm speaking to. You matter to me, and I'm going to help you in this way. And so if you hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Donald Trump, they're all using eunoia to be able to position themselves as you know what, I really want to help. You also have Nelson Mandela. I stand here before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. That's a more direct example of it. You've got more generic examples. So an entrepreneur could be saying, look, I value our partnership and I'm committed to finding a solution that benefits both of us. So the entrepreneur is trying to say to the other person, look, I care about what's going on for your business. Anytime you effectively subtextually say to the audience, I care about you and you matter to me, is an example of Eunoia. And once again, it's not just about being credible. It's not just about demonstrating virtue like you're a good person. It's not just about demonstrating that you're wise. And it's not just about demonstrating that you care. All of those will be different in their impact, and some of them will be more powerful and more impactful than others, depending on what the situation is. But what's important is to be able to recognize that regardless of the situation you find yourself in, all of these are qualities that make people more likely to believe you and more likely to be persuaded by you. Number 5 is authority, and this is when we use recognized authority to support our arguments, and this is oftentimes borrowing credibility as well. But these are the experts, and this is where I'm getting my information from. Martin Luther King said the Declaration of Independence proclaims that all men are created equal. Once again, what he's doing there is citing the Declaration of Independence, which many people put a very strong authority on. The World Health Organization is another example of this. According to WHO guidelines, is something that was commonly communicated in terms of the media, whatnot. You've got, in terms of climate scientists, sometimes people will say 97% of climate scientists agree that before they make their point. And you also have things like, well, top economists say that this and that and the other. And then an example from Donald Trump would have been, nobody knows the system better than me, which is why I alone can fix it. So once again, he's both referencing himself, but he's also positioning himself as the authority to listen to in that way. You've got other examples. For example, you could have, in terms of consultants in business, for example, you could say our strategy aligns with the best practices recommended by top consulting firms. So what you're again doing is you're referencing some authority that's explaining why you actually are absolutely correct. Instead of just saying it because it's you, you're actually claiming that some authority actually gives you more credibility as a result, which once again can be quite impactful and powerful. Number 6 is what we call character reference. And character reference is referring to one's character or other people's character as a persuasion tool. So a good example comes from another politician, John McCain, who says, I'm not a hero, but I've served in the company of heroes. So he's referencing the incredible servicemen and women that he worked with in conflicts that he's been to. And most people are aware of his war record in the public eye, but he's positioning himself, even though he says, I'm not a hero, because he says he's serving in the company of heroes, it's kind of positioning him as a kind of a hero as well. Because, even oftentimes you can say you're not something, but actually you're saying that you are something as well. George Washington, the founder of the United States of America, said, I hope I shall possess firmness and virtue enough to maintain what I consider the most enviable of all titles, the character of an honest man. So the fact that he's pursuing being an honest man immediately kind of implies that he is honest, because he's not saying I am honest. He's saying I really want to do all I can to be the most honest person in the world. So that is a great line there. Nelson Mandela said, I'm not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. Once again, it's a little bit self-deprecating, but at the same time, it also makes him even more sort of virtuous and good as a result, kind of demonstrates a stronger character as a result of that. Donald Trump talked about, he said, I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman and I get things done. So in this way, he's a little less self-deprecating here, but what he is doing is he's positioned himself as a businessman as opposed to a politician, and creating a sort of a dichotomy between the two. You've got the politicians who are all the same and corrupt is the subtext, but you've got a businessman who's like, my job is to be able to succeed, to win. And that's what I'm going to do here. So he's positioning himself with the characteristic of being more of a business person and more of a winner. Joe Biden would often refer to his background as Scranton boy. So it's like positioning himself with that kind of background that's more relatable. And just because we don't want to leave her out, Kamala Harris refers often to her background as a prosecutor and her fight for justice. Now, as you can notice, a lot of these are overlapping, right? So, you could have a character reference that also tends to be positioning themselves as virtuous or tends to be communicating themselves as wise. So all of these are mixed, But I wanted you to be aware of them because I think it's a good idea to be able to start thinking through how can in your speeches, in your communication, even in the way in which you write about yourself online, how can you start to leverage some of these keys to be able to position yourself appropriately, right? You might be very good at establishing ethos, but are you leveraging authority effectively? Are you leveraging the scientists that stand behind what you're talking about? Every time you hear me say evidence-based techniques, I'm leveraging, for example, authority. What about your virtue? Are you demonstrating how you come across in that way? Are you leveraging Arete? Are you demonstrating Phronesis in order to position yourself as wise? Like, what are the kinds of strategies that you're using? And it might be a good idea to start to think through how often do you actually position yourself with these 6 different techniques? Because when you start to notice what you're not doing, it really helps you to start to be more effective at positioning yourself in a more persuasive manner as a result. I just want to finish on talking about what are the kinds of things we can do to be able to leverage these kind of techniques, but in a way that doesn't make us seem like we're arrogant or doesn't make it seem too heavy-handed, right? If you tell people how amazing you are, obviously the first thought that goes through their mind is more likely going to be, "Thou do protest too much. Why do you have to tell me you're amazing? If you're amazing, you shouldn't have to tell me." And so there's a few things that we need to be able to recognize. There's a concept called the humble brag, which is pretty much a very thinly veiled attempt at hiding the fact that we're talking about how amazing we are. So it's like when somebody says, "I feel so fortunate that I'm a winner and I'm the best on this and that and the other." And it's really important for us to recognize when we're falling into that trap. So it doesn't sound like a brag and it doesn't sound like a humble brag. And some techniques to help us to do this is to truly express sincere gratitude. So really focus on thanking the people that are around. Focus on thanking and feeling grateful for the position that you're in. And not just a simple, half a line where you go, "I'm so thankful for," and then brag, 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 brag. Instead, what you're looking to do is you're really looking to genuinely thank people while mentioning, what you feel very grateful for, but also make sure that you're focusing on them. You can also highlight the impact. So you focus on the impact of your work as opposed to, your personal gain or your title or what you've been awarded with. You focus on the impact that your work has had. And the more you can name this and label this and even measure this, the better. You've got challenges that you acknowledge, you talk about, and you make sure you communicate to people about how this was tough and difficult and what you went through. Because once again, when you're focusing on the fact it was hard, it's less about how amazing are you, and it's much more about the journey that you took. And then the other thing is to incorporate other people when you're staying very real in the way you put things across. So you incorporate the other people that deserve celebration. So it's different than thanking people. It's also like celebrating people about other people's accomplishments as well. If you can do a number of those things while you're positioning yourself persuasively, whether it's a speech or whatever it is, you will find yourself being able to demonstrate these techniques in a much more natural and much more impactful way. Even in the examples I gave you today, you probably find that some of them hit better than others. Some of them tend to resonate more. Some of them are more powerful. So once again, how can you take some time to use some of these techniques to be an even more impactful speaker? So I hope you found this useful. This is the first in the rhetoric series. I'm going to do more over the course of the next few weeks. And I really want you to be able to get as much as you can from this so that you can walk away and you're even more effective at being able to communicate and deliver your messages through speeches. For now, I'm Owen Fitzpatrick. Take care, be well, and as always, may the force be with you. Bye for now.